In this week's Parshat, Parshat Vayetzei, we read the primary topic that we read about is the marriage of Yaakov Avinu to Rachel and Leah, and the number of children that they have. And it's very striking that in the beginning it's Rachel who seems to be the preferred, clearly the preferred. And indeed, when we're first described, the Torah describes to us these the two daughters of Lavan. We are told, "Ulavan shtei banos shem agdola Leah, shem aktana Rachel, ve'ene Leah rakos, ve'Rachel haisi yifas Torah v'yifas mare," is that the eyes of Leah are referred to as rakos, or soft, literally, and Rachel was very, very beautiful. Rashi explains that what was the softness of Leah's eyes. Rashi tells us because there were two daughters to Lavan, Rachel and Leah. And she thought as the eldest she would be destined for Esav, and Rachel would be destined to Yaakov. And she was always crying about this destiny that she has. Indeed, in the beginning it is Yaakov who seems to have a greater allegiance to Rachel, a greater love for Rachel, and Leah is, if you will, the second wife on some level. But then they start to have children. And it is Leah who has the bracha of having many children up front, and Rachel is an akara. And as a result of having those children, indeed, the tide seems to turn a little bit. Leah ends up with 6 children. 6 of the Shvatim come from Leah, and Rachel at the end of the day only has 2. And in fact, there seems to be even a shift as one looks through the Pshuta Shal Mikra and the Psukim, is that after every child, as Leah names those children, there's a greater allegiance, a greater affection that seems to emerge between Yaakov and Leah. Indeed, she's the one who's going to be buried in Maras Machpelah. And when it comes to Rachel, there is a certain frustration, perhaps, a certain more difficulty that arises as a result of her being a little bit more desperate about having children, not having children at the end. And indeed, at the end of the period, it is Rachel who's only Zochet to have 2 of the Shvatim, whereas Leah ends up having 6. It's very striking, perhaps it's a very fundamental Musar Haskel over here, is that Rachel really starts with great promise, with great, great optimism, with great beauty, with the great love that Yaakov and Rachel have for each other, but at the end it doesn't realize itself in the same way. Leah, who on some level was the second wife, so as they progress, ultimately her ultimate resting place is going to be Maras Machpelah, and for the end of days, if you will, she will be together with Yaakov in a way that perhaps Rachel will not. And you find even throughout their offspring this dichotomy, this tension, whereas in some level, and perhaps this is the fascinating dichotomy between the beginnings of Rachel and the staying power, the length, the time of Leah. For example, one of Rachel's offspring is Yosef, but the ultimate Malchus, Yosef was a Melech, but the ultimate Malchus comes from Yehuda. Similarly, when it comes to the Mashiach, there's going to be Mashiach ben Yosef, but the ultimate lasting Mashiach is going to be the Mashiach ben David, was going to be Mashiach coming from Shevet Yehuda. Yeshua ben Nun, the first Navi, came from the Shevet of Rachel, but when it comes to the lasting institutions of Moshe, Kahuna, Aaron, and so forth, that is all from Leah. Shaul, the first Melech, was from Binyamin, offspring of Rachel. David HaMelech is Shevet Yehuda, and so forth and so on. You find this dichotomy that the beginnings come from Rachel, but what is lasting ultimately comes from Leah. Perhaps no coincidence, the high promise that Rachel starts out with, the great optimism that she starts out with, but at the end, Leah seems to have a greater level of staying power. Leah is the one who cries in the beginning, Eine Leah Rakos. But at the end of times, we know that the ultimate cry for Klal Yisrael is Rachel Imenu, Rachel Mevaka Al Banel, the Rachel who is buried on the border of Golos, who's always going to be crying for children. She's going to be the ultimate cry of Klal Yisrael. She's going to be the one who, in fact, bore some difficulties, sufferings in her life. She's going to be crying for Klal Yisrael throughout the ages, and thus this phenomenal shift that you find. Leah starts out crying. Rachel is going to be the crier, the mispalel for Klal Yisrael throughout the ages, and this is the up and down, sometimes the vicissitudes, the up and downs of life, is that someone who starts with promise, different directions one takes, different directions that these imahos take. They both represent the imahos, they both represent the core in establishing who Klal Yisrael is. But the different directions, different destinies, one can certainly draw many very important lessons from them.